So this morning you got a picture, I hope, of what I call the architecture of the impure mind. Or sometimes this is also very accurately and very precisely known as the configured mind. And so this term mind is kind of a imprecise, fuzzy term. It means a number of things in our ordinary language. So it means mind in one sense as opposed to everything physical. So if there were a Cartesian dualism, there would be mind and there would be matter. In one sense, it's everything other than matter in one scheme. In another, it is also the place, you could say, or the space in which all mental activity is occurring. So thoughts, images, dreams arise in the mind. And so it's a really imprecise term in our common usage of it. And sometimes mind can mean all of the mind that includes nirvana, all of the mind that includes samsara. But in Dzogchen, mind means something very precise, or in the way that Dujam Lingpa uses it especially. And that is that it is mind usually refers to configured mind. And how is it configured? Exactly in the way that you were introduced to this morning. So it is the unconfigured mind is substrate and substrate consciousness. So this is a stem consciousness that could become anything. It could become human, it could become animal, could become preta, could become a hell being, a deva, anything within the three realms. So what is it then that configures the mind? Well, it's karma that is going to configure the potentiality of all of these seeds that we accumulate over countless lifetimes into a particular configuration. And then the configured mind becomes everything below, you could say, Klishta-manas. So this then is often described in Dzogchen is like water freezing. So before the water freezes, before the unconfigured mind is configured, it's like liquid water. And you could say that all liquid water molecules have the same nature. They have a potential to become individualized. And so all of the water in the ocean, or let's just say a freshwater lake anyway, is identical in nature. Or all the water certainly in the ocean is identical in nature. But so it's H2O, simple molecules unconfigured of H2O. But that same molecule of H2O becomes individualized and crystallized as it freezes. And so this, then, there is let's just say the story that every snowflake is individual. There are no two snowflakes in nature that are the same. And so this is like our stem consciousness of substrate and substrate consciousness freezing. So you could say that those are liquid. And then they freeze, they become particularized after we take birth, or with conception, taking birth. And then we become born as in one realm or another. And then we begin to individuate. Our crystallized selves begin to become uniquely ourselves. We have our own experience growing up in our own families, in our own cultures, and then we interact with the environment and we react to them in our own individual ways. And now we can say there are definitely no two people in this room who are the same, even though we started out with this H2O consciousness, uncrystallized. So the uncrystallized becomes crystallized and individualized through that process of devolution that talked about everything below Klishta. So all of the different forms of mentation are which is mental consciousness. These are what actually give the crystallization to the liquid substrate consciousness. So this afternoon, now that we have this framework, we are very well prepared to begin exploring Dujam Lingpa's approach to Shamata. And then once we achieve Shamata, we use this basic, still this same framework to do Vipassana practice. So everything is, one of the things that I just love about this approach is that everything is so closely knit. Everything just reinforces each other. There's nothing wasted. Your shamatha is so close, it's right on the edge of vipassana that you don't need to add too much more to your shamatha practice to make it genuine vipassana. And then your vipassana practice, based in shamatha, is so close to cutting through practice that you don't have to do too much more new also than to cut through configured consciousness altogether to pristine awareness. So let's explore this, what I think of as just a system of genius. And of course it would be, because this was revealed to Dujam Lingpa by the Lake-born Vajra himself. So the basic theme that we are going to be working with in Dujam Lingpa's approach to shamatha is stillness and motion. And you got an introduction to this yesterday with the practice of the Dzogchen approach to mindfulness of breathing. So the point of that practice was to introduce you to this basic skill. You could call it just a fundamental standalone skill of recognizing the difference between stillness and motion, and then trying to have a simultaneous experience of stillness and motion in one moment of perception, recognizing both stillness and motion. And so that is much easier to do, to really practice this skill and to develop the standalone skill with a neutral object like the breath, rather than a very complicated and alluring, compelling issue or appearance like mental appearances, your own mental appearances. And so we're going to take another step now towards beginning to work with stillness and motion in Dujam Lingpa's system. Now recall that the Mahasiddha Maitripa said that there are 3 types of shamatha practice. First of all, there is shamatha focused on signs, then shamatha focused on conceptuality, and shamatha focused on non-conceptualization. And where most of Dujam Lingpa's practice of shamatha actually uses the second method, shamatha focused on conceptualization. So the conceptualization refers to all of these appearances that are arising in the impure mind. And so his approach, he calls typically taking the impure mind as the path, or you could say taking the configured mind as the path. So all of these appearances actually are what we use as our object of shamatha. But I would like to begin actually our journey into this practice of shamatha by exploring the Mahasiddha Maitripa's third variety, which is shamatha focused on non-conceptualization. And the Mahasiddha Maitripa described this, saying, Let the mind, like a cloudless sky, be clear, empty, and evenly devoid of grasping, and settle it in utter vacuity. By so doing, you will experience the quiescence or the shamatha of joy, clarity, and non-conceptuality. And clarity and luminosity are often synonymous. So here you have the three qualities of shamatha: non-conceptuality, luminosity, and bliss. So this is, he says, settle your mind in an absence of appearances. So I believe you have, were you able to translate the chart, the four modes of mindfulness? Day 4.2, I believe. Oh, well, it's in the appendix. No. So anyway, perhaps there will be a chart coming. There's four modes of mindfulness in the appendix. I have a copy, thank you. So we have it in English available, but you don't actually need the chart. There may be more English copies back there if you can work with that. But otherwise, basically, we're going to just go through it anyway, step by step. So you won't be missing anything in the French, except something to refer to later. This is the most detailed explanation I have seen so far of Dujam Lingpa's presentation of these four modes of mindfulness. And curiously, this very detailed presentation, the most detailed presentation that I've seen of Dujam Lingpa's, comes out of a very, very short text called Sharp Vajra of Conscious Awareness Tantra. And this is a text that was revealed to Dujam Lingpa directly by the Lakeborn Vajra. And it is only, the root text is actually only 10 pages. And it reveals the entire path to liberation and full awakening through 8 phases. So that is why the title on the title page of your handouts, it says Dujam Lingpa's Vision of the Great Perfection, Phase 1. Because that's what we are doing here in this retreat, is Phase 1 of the 8 phases of Dujam Lingpa. But that first phase is quite extraordinary. In the first phase, you achieve shamatha, vipassana, and you have glimpses of Rigpa. So you don't stabilize in Rigpa, but you stabilize in Rigpa, or you have glimpses of Rigpa, of pristine awareness. So all of that in phase 1. So this is quite extraordinary. I think most people would be very content with that, but it's really, you haven't even really entered the path yet, according to Dujam Lingpa. So it's very possible that, we will do our best job at creating some facsimile of shamatha, have do some vipassana practice that could lead to some insights, true realizations, and then because of those realizations, or based upon those realizations, you might actually have, and I would guess that almost everybody has already had glimpses of Rigpa, of pristine awareness. So it's not something that is totally foreign, because it's not, in this system, it's already there. And it's as if the clouds, the moon is in the sky, but it's obscured by clouds. And so when the clouds part, and in the elaborated metaphor, there are 3 layers of clouds, but the clouds part and you see the moon. So is that the moon or not that you see? Yes, that is the moon. And then the clouds form again and it's obscured and you're left with a memory of the moon. But that was the moon that you saw. You had a glimpse of the genuine thing. And so this is the case in Dzogchen practice, that you can have glimpses of Rigpa and know it to be the real thing. And this is when you recognize Rigpa. It's called identifying Rigpa. Your practice becomes, you develop real enthusiasm, I should say, for your practice. Because now you know not only is the path possible, but now it's like a magnet that is just drawing you on. So let's have a look at this Dujam Lingpa's commentary. So there's a root text in this text called Essence of Clear Meaning is the auto commentary. Well, it's not the auto commentary strictly because the root text was created by the Lakeborn Vajra. This is Dujam Lingpa's commentary on the root text called Essence of Clear Meaning. And in this longer text, it's probably about 50 pages of commentary. It's laid out in an outline form. And the outline that we're most interested in right now, the heading of it is taking aspects of the mind as the path. So this is going to be our Shamata practice. And it is in this section then that he outlines the 4 modes of mindfulness. And Dujam Lingpa comments then, according to the teachings, there are 4 types of mindfulness of the essential nature of the path. The first entails distinguishing between stillness and movement. And by the power of familiarizing yourself with their different appearances, there is a single-pointed mindfulness of the unification of the two. Then, even while resting, without strenuously observing them like before, as its natural power manifests, there is manifest mindfulness. So these are in this commentary, this is a description of the first 2 modes of mindfulness. The first of these is single-pointed mindfulness, and the second is called manifest mindfulness. And so in this system of Dujam Lingpa, there are only these 4 modes of mindfulness that lead you all the way to Shamata, rather than the 9 levels of Shamata. And the first of these are single-pointed mindfulness, second manifest mindfulness. So there are really, in this approach to Shamata of Dujam Lingpa, there are only 2 things to do. Quite remarkably, it is first of all to recognize the difference between stillness and motion, and then to have a simultaneous experience of stillness and motion. And here the stillness refers to the stillness of awareness, and movement refers to the movement of mental appearances and sensory appearances as they arise. So all of appearances that arise within the configured mind are going to be noticed as motion. And so can we, from a still awareness, view the movement of the mind? And first of all we have to do is know the difference between the 2, and then we have a simultaneous experience of the 2. So if we are able to do that, have this simultaneous experience of stillness and motion, this really is the achievement of single-pointed mindfulness. And this would correspond to level 8 of Shamata. So only 2 things to do to achieve level 8, basically, of Shamata. And then manifest mindfulness is simply building on that achievement of single-pointed mindfulness in the same way that level 9 builds on level 8 of Shamata. In level 8, there is just the slightest effort required still to maintain your effortless single-pointed, or your single-pointed concentration. And then at level 9, it becomes effortless. So with manifest mindfulness, what had required some effort still in single-pointed mindfulness becomes effortless, but there's no new skill to learn. It's still just simultaneous stillness and motion. So I think it's very clear how important this is then in developing shamatha. So it's very simple and elegant, but not necessarily easy. And then after that, after we achieve essentially level 9 of shamatha, then this presentation of Dujam Lingpa really tells us exactly what happens between level 9 of shamatha, or level 9 of the 9 levels, and the actual achievement of shamatha. And this is in most presentations, there's a gap, basically, about what it is, how you get from level 9 to the actual mental and physical pliancy of shamatha. So this is very specific, although not rich in detail, but very specific. So he continues then with his 4 modes of mindfulness. Abiding loosely, without mindfulness, in a vacuous, wide-open clarity, a spacious vacuity, constitutes lying down on a bed that is devoid of mindfulness, which is the substrate. So now you have reached a point where, because of your single-pointedness that has become effortless, you now rest in substrate. So the question is then, how is that different than what you experience every night when you go to bed and you spend 6 hours in substrate? Well, the answer is that in this vacuity, you are resting in wide open clarity. So the vacuity, you could say, is the same. But what's different is now there is no unawareness. So remember the distinguishing characteristic of substrate in the earlier presentation was that substrate, the definition of it is that it is the unaware aspect of the ground. And this is the source of samsara, the unawareness of the ground. So now after maturing through single-pointedness and manifest mindfulness, all appearances disappear. There are no appearances in this stage. But what you're left with is this wide-open awareness, only awareness. And then, once coarse mindfulness has subsided, resting in a luminous vacuity is called self-illuminating mindfulness, or the substrate consciousness. So here, when we are moving back towards, or you could say, the path of evolution, we go through substrate before substrate consciousness. And so we have an awareness in this vacuity of substrate. But there is really no luminosity. So you could say there is, of the two aspects of mind that are luminous and knowing, you could say there is knowing but no luminosity. And then when substrate then emerges from substrate consciousness again, then we rest in luminosity. So this is called self-illuminating mindfulness, or the substrate consciousness. The former two kinds of mindfulness, that is, single-pointed mindfulness and manifest mindfulness, directly perceive whatever creative displays arise. While during the latter two, which are the absence of mindfulness and self-illuminating mindfulness, apart from abiding solely, only, apart from abiding only or solely, in dependence upon a subtle mode of apprehension, all radiant appearances and creative displays of thoughts cease. All radiant appearances and creative displays of thoughts cease. So there is only non-conceptuality. So when we actually achieve shamatha, then we are resting in substrate consciousness, in which there is only the experience of non-conceptuality, luminosity, and bliss. While we are attending to the breath as our object, we are attending to a very simple movement, very simple motion. And so it's much easier to recognize this motion without getting caught up in it. But when we are taking appearances of our own minds as the object, this is obviously a lot more challenging, because the mental appearances that arise are often so compelling, so alluring. They invite us to merge with them, to become non-lucid dreamers. So the very important thing that we need to keep in mind is that if we are to be successful at this, we cannot be watching the mind from within the mind. So we have to be watching the mind from outside the mind. And now you know how that's possible. So we need to be maintaining as our point of view all the way upstream of substrate consciousness. And then from this stillness and luminosity, we view all the movement of mental appearances that occur downstream we view them as motion. So you have stillness viewing motion. Remember that substrate consciousness illuminates appearances without becoming them. And this is exactly what we are hoping to maintain, and this is what we need to maintain if our experience of stillness and motion is going to be anything other than just our ordinary mind wandering. So the first thing that we need to do is to recognize the difference between the stillness of awareness and the movement of these mental appearances that are arising. And it may seem that we are already familiar with that difference, but are we really? These thoughts and emotions that arise, we instantly become fused with and identify with, and so our still awareness is set in motion. It goes on a journey wandering with the movement of the emotions, thoughts, images. So why is it that we can't recognize these appearances, even though it seems like we already do? I think it's the same reason that there is no absolute motion in the universe. Einstein said that there is only relative motion. So motion only exists relative to another body. And so if we are on an asteroid approaching Earth, are we in motion on the asteroid, or is the Earth in motion approaching us? So you need a frame of reference in order to show that the motion is relative to this frame of reference. And so what we need to do then is to first of all become very familiar with stillness. And then we will be able to see and recognize motion that is relative to this stillness. And so if we have never really experienced the stillness of awareness, we won't even notice the motion of mental appearances. So what we are going to work on today is first of all stillness. And this entails the stillness of awareness with no appearances. This is the way that Padmasambhava described that in the text Natural Liberation. In that way, until genuine Shamata arises in your mind stream, use numerous techniques to settle your mind in its natural state. As an analogy, if you wish to look at reflections and the planets and stars in a pool of water, they will not be seen where the water is disturbed by waves and ripples, but they are clearly seen by looking into a pool in which the water is lucid and still. Likewise, when the mind is jolted around by the wind of objects, like a rider on a bucking bronco, which is like a wild horse, even if you are introduced to pristine awareness, you will not identify it. For once the mind is helplessly manipulated by compulsive ideation, it does not see its own nature. So we are going to start with a practice of awareness of awareness. So this is a practice where your interest is not in appearances, but it is in simple awareness itself, the luminous nature of awareness. And so when we do this, it's not that appearances are going to stop completely, but that we just take no interest in them. And then with practice, they just stop trying to get your attention. And then you just rest without the intrusion of these appearances. And so you could say that over the course of the next couple of days, we are going to be working with a sliding scale of stillness and motion. So on one side, or one end of the continuum, will be stillness with no appearances or no interest in appearances. So this is only awareness. And then on the other end of the sliding scale is taking a very close interest in appearances. And so this is vipassana practice, because we are taking such a close interest in appearances because we want to see their nature. We're examining them very closely. So where we are going to be starting today is on this end with awareness with no appearances, only awareness aware of itself. And the way that we set our position on this sliding scale, because there are points in between these two ends also, the way that we choose our point of view along the sliding scale is with intention. So you are recognizing, I think, the power of intention in breath meditation and all of the practices that we have done so far. And so now we are going to be very explicit in our intention about how much interest are we taking in appearances. Are we interested in stillness? Are we interested in movement? Are we interested in simultaneous stillness and movement? So we can't suppress mental appearances entirely in order to rest in this awareness with no appearances. This isn't within our control. But we simply don't take an interest in these appearances that arise. So we don't engage them. And so the extraordinary Dzogchen Lama Yangtang Rinpoche, who was one of Lama Ellen's Dzogchen teachers, who just passed away in Sikkim at age 92 very recently, said in a recent in a teaching just before his death, when he was teaching this practice of Shamata without a sign, as it's called, that he said appearances are going to arise, and that your task while you are resting in this stillness of awareness is to note them. And so you note every appearance in the instant that it arises. And Lama Ellen was translating for him at this teaching, and he asked him for clarification, and he said, "This is Shamata without a sign that you're talking about, is that right?" And Yangtang Rinpoche said, "Correct, yes." So appearances are going to continue to arise, and you give them just enough interest so that you note them. The idea being that if you don't note them, if you're resting only in awareness and appearances are arising but you're not aware of them, then they have the power to abduct you, to come up behind you then with the chloroform rag, and then throw you in the trunk and take you away mind wandering. So if he uses Yangtang Rinpoche used the metaphor of a thief breaking into your house. And he said that just when a thief appears at the window, you simply note the thief and let them know that you see them. And then the thief withdraws. So he doesn't enter the house. So he's just noted. And then you have the appearance dissolves. So as you do this practice, what you may notice is this experience where you're resting in stillness of awareness, and your awareness becomes glassy smooth, like a pool of water. So this is exactly what Padmasambhava was talking about. The stillness of your awareness, like water that is able to reflect even the moon and the stars. But if it's turbulent, then you see no reflection. And so we're trying to maintain the stillness of this pond of water. And because there is no movement anywhere on the pond, it's glassy smooth. The instant that there is any movement, the slightest movement, it's noticeable as the slightest ripple. And at times I have practiced shamatha on the edge of beautiful lakes that were glassy smooth in the morning. And they were so mirror-like that you couldn't tell whether the rocks on the other side of this inlet that I was meditating on was actually the rock or the reflection. So it was perfect reflection. You couldn't tell where one began and where the other ended. But even out 30 meters or 40 meters out into the water, because the water was so smooth, if there was a tiny water bug that skittered across the surface, it was noticeable as a ripple in this mirror-like surface. And so this may be your experience as you are resting in the stillness of your awareness. There is not the slightest disturbance, so the instant that an appearance arises as movement, you notice it. And when you notice it, very likely what happens is that the appearance doesn't even fully form. It is just the slightest ripple on the mirror-like surface of the water. And so you never even get to know what that appearance would have turned into. It is just, a slight disturbance, a potentiality of an appearance that never manifested. And this is a lot easier to do, actually, than using the approach that is captured in a metaphor of an archer and a fencer who are dueling, a swordsman and an archer. The archer, shooting a bow. So imagine that you are an archer dueling with somebody who is shooting arrows at you. And so, en garde. And so it's not that you are just waving your sword wildly, waiting for an arrow to come, but you're perfectly still. You see the archer knock an arrow and shoot it, release it, and then at the last instant, with your foil, you knock it out of the air. So that is the other approach that is described, that the instant that an appearance arises, you just give it a flick. But I think it's easier to actually do it in the earlier way that I described, to notice these appearances as just tiny ripples, and then note them like the thief at the window, and they withdraw. And then as you do that successfully, you get into a flow of practice in which the frequency of these appearances arising just becomes much, much reduced. So when you are resting in this stillness of awareness, there are no appearances arising. And this couldn't be a more opposite situation from our contemporary culture, where we are flooded with stimulation. There is no stillness of awareness. There is only movement. And so the mind, our contemporary minds, are habituated to movement. And I think it's fair to say that most people in our modern culture are addicted to stimulation. And so people become anxious when they don't have their smartphones with them. And people fill every moment of silence with some sort of stimulation because we have constant media access. And so because of that, when we are trying to rest in stillness with no stimulation, our habitual mind is going to try to fill it. So in the beginning, excitation could become very intrusive and very insistent. So you have that problem of excitation becoming very noticeable. And on the other hand, of laxity, our minds are also habituated to realize that when there is no stimulation, it's time to go to sleep. And so what you may notice is either an extreme of excitation or laxity, and that this laxity can feel like, if you're not actually falling asleep, it can just feel like this spaced out quality, where there's just, because there's no object to engage with vividness, there's just this, fogginess. So we counteract both of those. And the way that, so if you encounter either this extreme excitation or laxity, you can just ask yourself, is this substrate consciousness that has is wandering or become spaced out? Or is this the configured mind that is wandering and spaced out? So the answer, of course, is that it is the configured mind. And so all you have to do then is to change your point of view to move upstream to substrate consciousness, to watch the excitation and to watch the laxity from that point of view. And then what you see is that even laxity, which can feel like so a part of who I am and what the condition of my consciousness, you see that also is only a mental appearance. And it's a really remarkable experience to feel really spaced out and shift your point of view, and in an instant feel brilliant clarity. It's entirely different than waking up from sleep. It just happens in an instant. And you are resting then in the natural state of the mind, in which there is no laxity, no excitation. So a key to noticing these appearances in the moment they arise, and it is key to note them in the moment they arise, because if you don't, and you notice them only after they are present, then they become a problem. The arrow has already struck then. And then your mind goes wandering. So it is very important to notice these appearances in the instant that they arise. And the key to doing that is the spaciousness of your awareness. So you are maintaining just this global, unbounded space of awareness. And then you notice the movement of these appearances arising within the space. So in order to not be abducted by this flood of appearances, let them arise in greater space, and then also let there be less traffic on the road, basically. Fewer mental appearances arising. And then the final point, it's important to rest in this relaxed, still, clear awareness. And also to know that your awareness is relaxed, still, and clear. It's not enough for it to just be relaxed, still, and clear. You must also have an awareness that it is still and clear. So this is the role of introspection. And now you can really appreciate, I think, that your introspection must be continuous. So if you have continuous introspection, you can notice if your still awareness is set in motion. Because there are no appearances, introspection is looking right at your still awareness. And it should notice the first instant that your awareness is being set in motion or that it is becoming lax. So if it is becoming either of those, check to see if your point of view has shifted into the configured mind, and then move your point of view back to the stillness and spaciousness and luminosity of substrate consciousness. It may sound difficult to do when it's unfamiliar to you, but by trying, these things become very familiar to you. And as the wonderful Nyingma Lama Khandro Rinpoche said in a teaching just last week to a group of us, that the important thing in realizing Mahamudra, which is the unconfigured mind of pristine awareness, the most important thing is to wear out cushions. And it's as simple as that. You get some basic instruction like this, and then you just wear out cushions. She said, even if that cushion happens to be a rock, wear it out. And that is the essential role of meditation. There is no insight without practice and no realization without many hours of meditation. And this is the quick path. So let's take a break, and we'll come back at 2:35, and we will do that meditation.